Today, we're going to look at the answers from our 8th and final passage of our ACT Science Review. This passage is a conflicting viewpoints passage. If we do a brief reading of our introductory paragraph, we can see that this passage is going to talk about the Great Lakes and the causes of low lake levels in these Great Lakes. Now, remember, with a conflicting viewpoints passage, after you've read the introductory paragraph, you should immediately go to the questions and read those questions to figure out what information you should be pulling from your two or three conflicting viewpoints. That will give you some guidance as to what to look for in these passages. As I read through Scientist 1's perspective, I underlined some sort of key words as I'm reading through it. So ebb and flow of nature, above average precipitation, a gradual rise, and lowering of water levels, lower than average precipitation, evaporation, mild winters. All of these have to do with nature. So off to the side of my passage, I should write a couple of notes just to remind me what Scientist 1 is saying about low lake levels in the Great Lakes. And this is what Scientist 1's perspective is, that low lake levels are natural, and they have to do with warmer temperatures, mild winters, but that they're not controllable by human means. Now, if I go to Scientist 2 and I read through their perspective, I should see some conflicting information here. So human activities, waters being regulated, diversions, modifications that have affected lake levels, aquifers, all of this. So low lake levels, according to Scientist 2, are unnatural. I'm seeing words like diversions, dredgings, and modifications have changed lake levels. This is all saying that you can change this. This is something that is affected by human activity. Okay, now let's look at the questions. You should already have an idea as to what you're looking for in these questions because you should have already read them. So, question 6. Which of the following best describes the major point of difference between the scientists' viewpoints? This is a detail question. We actually find it in our introductory paragraph. It's the last sentence of our introductory paragraph that says, 2 scientists discuss the causes of low lake level in the Great Lakes. So our answer choice is answer choice F, the major contributing factor of low lake levels. Question 7. With which of the following statements would both scientists likely agree? Again, this is a detail question. If you read through all of our answer choices and you look back at that same sentence that we were looking at, the 2 scientists discuss the causes of low lake level in the Great Lakes, that should lead you to answer choice C. Recent trends show that the lake levels are decreasing. 2 very easy questions to start us out. Question 8. Which of the following statements best describes how Scientist 1 would explain why human interference is of little importance in determining lake levels? Again, this is another detail question. We made a note of this off to the side, but this is also found in the last sentence of Scientist 1's perspective, which says, because water is added through snow and rain and taken away through evaporation, nature has most of the control over lake levels. That leads us to answer choice J. Lake levels are mainly controlled by nature and not manipulated by humans. Question 9. According to Scientist 2, human activity diverts lake water, thus doing what? Again, this is a detail question. And we can actually pull this statement out of Scientist 2's perspective here. You can see that they're talking about the St. Clair and the Detroit rivers being dredged and modified, and that this has caused some drop in the levels of Lake Michigan and Lake Huron. All right, so that gets us to answer choice B, that human activity is reducing the amount of water in the lakes. Question 10. Scientist 1's viewpoint would most likely be weakened by which of the following statements? This is an inference question, and if you read through all of your answer choices, you should look for something that's sort of mentioned in the passage. So in our passage in Scientist 1's perspective, you see the sentence here that says higher degrees of evaporation from warmer than usual temperatures in recent years, a series of mild winters, and below average snowpack in the Lake Superior Basin has contributed to lower water levels. So the only way that we could weaken this particular statement is if we were to say that, well, precipitation and evaporation has actually been stable for the last 50 years. And that would weaken this particular sentence coming out of Scientist 1's viewpoint. Question 11. Scientist 2 claims that all of the following are human activities that are decreasing lake levels except what? So again, this is a detail question, and really all we have to do is read through the passage and just sort of cross off the ones that we see. So if we go through this, we see the Lake Michigan diversion, so we can cross off answer choice B, diversions for domestic navigation, hydroelectric, and sanitation purposes. We keep reading, we see dredging, so we can cross off C, dredging and modification of rivers. And then a little bit later, we see infilling of shoreline areas, so we can cross that off as well. That leads us to answer choice A, destruction of watershed tributaries. Question 12. How would the effect of the use of aquifer water differ from that described by Scientist 2 if all of the water taken from the aquifers that surrounded the Great Lakes was used within the Great Lakes watershed? The use of the aquifer water would do what? This is an inference question. So if we go back to Scientist 2's perspective, and we're looking specifically at this part, diversions bring water into and take water out of the Great Lakes. We can't necessarily say that as much water is coming in as is going out. So the assumption would be if all of that water is being used within the Great Lakes watershed, that we wouldn't see any water loss. And so therefore we would have little to no effect on the lake levels. That's it for our ACT Science passages, but let's do a quick recap of what we've learned about the ACT Science test. First, let's recap the basics of the test. Remember, you have 35 minutes to complete 6 to 7 passages for a total of 40 questions. That gives you about 5 minutes per passage. You don't need to do them in order. In fact, now that you've done several of each type of passage, you should look back and think about what type of passage you do the best on and always go to that passage first. Complete every passage before you move on to the next one. Remember, there are 3 types of passages. The first is data representation, which describes the study, generally 3 passages in each science ACT. The second is research summaries. They describe an experiment with multiple parts. 2 to 3 passages of this type in each ACT. And the last is a conflicting viewpoints passage, comparing 2 or more conflicting scientists on the same topic. There are only ever 1 of these types of passages on the ACT. Your data representation passages will generally just give you an introductory paragraph and a table. Your research summary passages will often have Experiment 1 or Experiment 2, or Study 1, Study 2, or Trial 1, Trial 2, and you're looking at multiple trials where you're changing one variable. And your conflicting viewpoints passage will almost always say Scientist 1 or Scientist 2, or use the specific name for a type of scientist studying that particular field. For instance, Astronomer 1 and Astronomer 2. Again, there are 5 types of questions: detail questions, pattern questions, inference questions, scientific method questions, of which there are only about 3 or 4 on the test, and compare and contrast questions, of which there are only about 1 and 2. If you only learn one thing from looking at the ACT Scientist review videos, let it be this: to draw your trend lines. Make sure that you're always drawing it in the same direction. For me, that would be smallest to largest. For you, it can be opposite, so that you can tell if something is directly proportional or inversely proportional very quickly. When you get to the test, here are some pieces of advice for you. First off, pick your favorite type of passage. Do those passages first. Second, always draw your trend lines. That will help you to answer questions quickly later on. Third, answer all of the questions in a passage before you move on to your next passage. While you don't need to complete the questions within a passage in order, it will help you to complete them all before moving on so that you don't have to refresh yourself on the topic of a passage if you skipped a question earlier. If you're running out of time, start answering all the detail questions. Those ones allow you to answer them without having to read the passage itself. And if you completely run out of time, pick your favorite letter. Do not try and Christmas tree your ACT. Pick your favorite letter. For me, it's always B, but make sure that any blank question that you have left, you're picking your favorite letter and you're just filling it in. That's it. That's everything I have to share with you about the ACT Science. Good luck.